Nui, aloha pu mehana kākou. Pehea oi e mehana o ka la.
Well, mai ka'i wale no, Manu. Mahalo nui, and mahalo to all of you out there. I'm watching another episode of Midday Manaʻo with Mehana and Manu and Mehana, whichever you prefer.
How we say that is Midday Manaʻo, Mehana, and Manu.
And this is, of course, brought to you by the Council for Native Hawaiian Advancement and the Kaiser Permanente. I think I said that wrong. I added extra little vowels and consonants in there.
I heard an extra consonant.
Yeah, and that's rare because we don't use too much consonants in Olelo Hawaii.
That's so Vanna White of you.
I know.
I
was buying extra consonants in there. Yes, we will hanaho that name for Kaiser. The Kaiser Permanente National Benefit Fund.
Yeah.
Mahalo to them. And again, mahalo to all of you for joining us today because we have a special guest here at our home in Kapolei. He's a great friend of ours. I've known you for about, the last 10, 15 years or so, and the great work that you have done. Of course, this is Kawika Patterson. He has done many things in his life. Of course, he is the administrator for the Kawailoa Youth and Family Wellness Center. I had to look at my notes because that is actually a name change and such a change in paradigm from what it used to be called, which was, we all knew it as the Ko'olau Boys and Girls Home.
Yes.
Right? So he's the current administrator for that, but he's also the chair for the Hawaii Correctional System Oversight Commission.
Yes.
Really tough position to be in. Right, really needs a strong leader in that position. And then, of course, the president of our dear friends and members of CNHA, president and of the board of directors for the Native Hawaiian Legal Corporation.
Yes.
Yeah, so thank you for joining us today.
I can't wait to hear about Kawailoa.
Yes.
What a beautiful name. But anyway, aloha mai.
Aloha.
Welcome to our little Avakea forum, Midday. Hey, oi, how are you?
Good. I'm good. I'm glad to be here. Glad to share with you folks, and just honored that I was asked.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about what's going on, and where you've been, and what you're doing, and how we can share that with our ohana out in the audience.
Well, I guess I can share just real quick. I'm on my 34th year working in corrections here in Hawaii. I've held many hats, and I think my journey through the correctional profession here in Hawaii. Began in 1987 when the state opened Halawa Correctional Facility, and I was hired as one of the correctional officers. I rose through the ranks. I was a captain at the facility of the guard. I was captain of the guard at OCCC, and I was captain of the guard at the women's facility, and eventually became the warden. And then everything I learned there, working with the women, I moved to the youth facility, and same partners moved with me, and that just happened. So we're successful there as well.
I wanted to honor you for a little bit and talk a little bit about your work at the women's prison. That is where my intersection with you came in, and I was allowed to go in and help and do various programming with the Pu'a Foundation at that time. And one of the things that I will always credit you for is how you took historic trauma and trauma-informed care, right, to the next level in a space that outside of you, right, and outside of that particular space was not very much, really looked at as a solution for the things that are impacting our community. Right, you really, invested time and resources and brought partners together to talk about trauma-informed care, and really look at the core and critical issues that these ohana were going through that resulted in the women, sometimes multi-generations, right, grandmothers, mother, and daughters in that. So thank you so much for doing that, and I can only see. Right, what's happening now at Kawailoa? How was that transition and changing the paradigm of how even that is looked at?
the shift from me having almost 19 years with men and then going to the women's facility was eye-opening for me. It was actually just a game changer for my profession, because you realize when I looked at the profile of the woman that comes in there, they were averaging 3 to 5 years of incarceration. They had lack of employable skills. They had lack of education. They had inability to maintain positive relationships. And then there was addiction that we associated with trauma. And when you understand trauma, 80% of the women at the facility was diagnosed with PTSD. 80%. I looked at that and went, whoa. And we're talking about verbal abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse. Yeah. And a lot of this is in a lifetime of experience rather than a single event. Right. That can happen from the time 4 or 5.
This is not an easy job, I'm sure, in any way. Yeah. And I think it takes a certain kind of kanaka to be able to do this. And just sitting next to you, and not really, as I mentioned earlier, I know your brother, Kahu Kaleo, and he had also a way, when I was working for years in the Hawaiian community at the Office of Hawaiian Affairs and other places, to be kind of a even-keeled, kind of a calming, kind of ho'omalie. And I really appreciate that. But the exact opposite of that, I would say, is trauma. So maybe a little bit more about what that means, and to explain to our audience how difficult and how important that is to deal with.
It's important for us to understand trauma as an individual, a family member, and as well as a people. Yeah, as a people, we have to know that we have, by DNA, whatever you want to say it, what we call and refer to as historical trauma. Yeah, and we always look at the overthrow of the Queen and how they affect the 2 generations above us that were there at that time, and what happened to them in the communities that they belong to, and how that change in government affected the family situation in those communities, and what happens to those families as they're trying to adjust to the change. So that's historical trauma. Yeah, and historical trauma leads to poverty, social issues, and it's not a single generation, it's intergenerational.
Right.
So that's one. And so as the family struggles to survive, then you have things within the family household that is occurring that increases trauma. Right. Domestic abuse, drinking, addiction, all kinds of abuses going on in the house. And so then you have the individual trauma. So that's how you really look at understanding we have to deal with it at a state system level, or else it just it keeps on going.
Right.
Yeah. So that's how important it is to move from a punitive system to a more therapeutic system.
Thank you for saying that, because your work is so much in healing.
Yes.
Right. That's the perspective that you come from, is that there needs to be, rather than punishment, there needs to be healing of that, because the punishment model just keeps creating more and more trauma upon itself, right? It keeps, recreating that over and over in every generation. The healing model aims to stop that, stop the trauma from being passed on, right, and continuing on.
Or even really to explain it. I don't think people who are traumatized really even understand that they're being traumatized. And I think that's really important. So your point is really good, Mehana. In Hawaii, that word is lapa'au. Lapa'au is to heal. And we talk about la'au, which is like medicine. But lapa'au is to heal, ho'oponopono sometimes as well. But tell me a little bit about, and maybe to hit on that, about how do you explain to the inmates or to all of those who you are serving, how their situation has manifested, even before you get to how to try and ease it or lapa'au.
At the women's facility, the best way to have done that, because you could say you have to go into a substance abuse treatment program, but that's a Western concept, because for us it should be a journey of finding oneself, because a lot of women may not want to deal with the trauma because it's they don't want to remember, They don't want to deal with it. So there's walls. So it's a matter of creating a journey for them within the facility to crumble the walls so that they're more acceptance of the treatment. Okay. Now, when you look at it from a Native Hawaiian perspective, what we did to help the women in making those decisions was to create opportunities for them to, they would go and they would maintain the grounds at Ulupoheao.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we would work in the fish ponds, like a local. Oh, I'm sorry, can't remember.
Local.
Yeah, in Kaneohe, across from Castle High School.
Yeah.
And we had all
building hale and Waimea.
Yeah, they're doing all of these things so that they can, and then interesting enough, a correction officer came up to me when I first started at the facility, and she told me to come with the work line to Ulupo, and she said, I don't know what happens, but sometimes I find them. They're very emotional. They're sitting on the ground and they're crying, and I tell, what's the matter? She said, I don't know. Every time I come here, the land touches me. Yeah.
You have people there like Kaleo Wong and his wahine Maya.
Mm-hmm.
They take such good care of that, and something about making things grow.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And being at a heiau that's dedicated to well-being is also that's amazing. Planting mea kanu.
Right. And making that connections, right? Where you were able to, because you were in a position to be able to affect that.
Yes.
Right. And so, your climb out through the rankings. I know that when I went to the women's prison, you were well respected because you came up through the ranks. Right. So the staff, the other guards, and respected you, and it was probably the hardest job you had was convincing those, the bureaucracy outside of you to really embrace that, and then now, so you go from the women's prison and you go across the street, right, to a place that was once known as the Hawaii Youth Correctional Facility, right, and you huli that, right, you huli it upside down to create a wellness center, right, so you continue that work, and some would say, even me looking at that as, wow, this is evolving. Your work is evolving into spaces, right, that I never thought would be able to crack, right? Even in my mind, even how optimistic I am, I'm just like, wow, that's a tough job.
Maybe just describe for our audience geographically what we are talking about. Waimanalo, we're talking about Kailua, we're talking about where are we at?
I'll even back up even further.
Mm-hmm.
So in 1928, the territory of Hawaii created 2 reformatories. One was called the Kawailoa Training School for Girls. That was 1,000 acres in what is now Kailua, Olomana, all the way to what is now Kailua High School.
Oh, wow.
1,000 acres that opened up as a ranch and a farm for girls. On the North Shore, it was called the Wailele Training School for Boys. Okay, and there was another 1,000 acres. Parts of it is still there, but that was the intention of dealing with the juvenile issues of the time. Most recently, in a report from the Department of Interior, those 2 schools was listed as participants in the United States boarding school program for Native Americans, Native Alaskans, and Native Hawaiians.
That's a whole nother story.
That's a whole nother story that's coming to light now.
We talked a little bit about that in a past show, but I didn't make that connection.
I'm loving the names of Kawailoa and Wailele.
Yeah.
But I mean, you have to. They paralleled the norms of the time.
Right.
So, so here we are today.
And so when we come up to statehood in 1959, a few years after statehood, they built the prison that we know right now, and they closed Wailele, and they brought the boys to the prison, and that was Ko'olau Boys Home. But they changed the name from Kawailoa Training School for Girls to the Hawaii Youth Correctional Facility, because the girls were still there, and across from Kalanianaʻole was the boys. And then in the 90s, they built another prison. They brought the boys over, and they gave the prison to the women. Yeah, and so that's where we are today. Yeah,
it's funny. Even the word correctional. Yeah, Mehana. I mean, it's just like someone standing up above and saying, you have to be corrected. And I'm into names, and I think just that in and of itself. And so the history continues.
And so in 2009, we started what we call juvenile justice reform. The judiciary came together and said, we don't want to put kids in prison anymore. So from that front end, they started looking at diversion. Office of Youth Service supporting them with programs so that we can do alternatives to incarceration. So in that 10-year period to today, they decreased the incarcerated population by 85%.
Awesome.
Yeah. And so we closed 2 of the 3 correctional structures that we have. Everybody's in one facility now. And so when I came, I asked me, well, you guys are doing good already. What do you guys want me to do? Well, because we're emptying structures, we're emptying buildings, we need to revitalize and revision the facility. And I said, well, where has juvenile justice not touched? And so we talked about victims of sex trafficking, minors. We talked about homelessness. We talked about vocational training, and we talked about mental health. Hawaii sends maybe 30 to 40 of our youth to the mainland for mental health treatment, multiple diagnoses. Yeah, and we don't have the ability to do it here.
Right.
So my vision at that point was to take these 4 things and to move and create opportunities for that on the campus with the buildings that we have.
Right.
And in order to do that, I said we need to change the name so that it becomes a sanctuary, a pu'u honua, yeah, for our most vulnerable kids and their families.
Right.
Yeah, and that's where we made the name change. But we took the name, the original name.
Right.
Of Kawailoa. It's a historical name.
There must have been somebody back then who suggested that name for good reason.
Anything with vai is healing.
Yeah, of course.
Right? Yeah, so that was that wisdom, right, from back then. And hopefully, I mean, we're imbuing this, on the namers of that time, but it makes sense to us
I was even thinking that even you have the wahine going over to Ulupo Heiau in Kailua, and that is a part of the whole Kawainui Marsh, the whole system. And that is very female-centric as well because of Hau'awahine, who is the mo'o deity of Kawainui.
Yep.
And so I think that, but those little things, I mean, I think that's why we're kind of nerds in that kind of way. We like things like that. But how beautiful! So the name reverted.
Yes.
Back to its original.
One of the ancient names and it's an ancient name because on our property we have a freshwater spring called Kawailoa Spring.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's the long water because right now it flows under Kalaniʻanaʻole Highway, comes out in the women's prison as a stream, and then it flows under Kailua High School into the wetlands.
Oh.
Yeah. And there, in the old days, there were actually rice, taro, everything was along that path. That's the long water. Yeah.
Well, you're right, Mehana. Vai is just that as a symbol is very healing.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
So if you look at some of the program names, and I won't be able to go off the top of my head, but we took that symbolism, and a lot of the programs are named after the rains associated with Oloma.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. That builds connection back because one of the things that I learned while with you folks about trauma-informed care, was reconnection to more of a primal identity, right? More of your core identity, where health lives, right? Where, like the center view, there's a history of health somewhere that got disrupted, right? And so we point to the overthrow and things like that. But before that, there was health, there was well-being there, right? And to connect back to that, right? To hopefully there's something in 2022 that these young people can experience while at Kawailoa that will reconnect them. Get their DNA jump started again, right? Back into that.
When we talk about the concept of pu'u honua and a sanctuary for a person to come and heal and a family, the ultimate goal is to teach individuals who have experienced severe trauma, how do we create the pu'u honua within yourself? How do you calm the spirit within yourself? And as we go back into the community, you're going to have times when you fall or things happen to you, but we need to teach you how to get over that.
Right.
The answers are in you.
It's about identity also. And one thing, because we all have ohana that have been down that road in the past. And there's something about Hawaiian identity that lives in your inoa Hawaii. And many of us, have a Hawaiian surname or inoa Hawaii. And that's important. But also something as simple even as music. I mean, music and because I know there's all kinds of talent, but it really, I think, zeroes back or comes back to focus on identity. Do you identify as somebody who's a good, productive member of society, or do you identify as somebody who needs to be corrected? You know, and that's a harsh concept to consider.
Right.
It's about reestablishing, you know, who you are is important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things that you were successful at doing, right, and we're gonna give you praise for this. We had a little talk about this before, but was the fact that there was no girls that were incarcerated for a period of time there. Can you talk about that? Because that went viral, right? That went, like, soon as that news came out, you know, we're all checking. We're like, is this true? Like, that's such a great thing that there are no young wahine who are, you know, who are in a facility, you know, sorts. Can you talk a little bit about that?
It was really coming in, and I've always advocated, even when I was at the women's prison, in order for me to be successful with the facility that is under my control, I need to advocate for the women or the girls before they come to me. Right. Is to really look over there and why are they coming to me? Look at what I'm getting. I say, how come she's here? Where was the intervention that was unsuccessful? And what is it to replace it? Right. Yeah. So we're really out there working in the community and understanding if she has trauma, what was the first step?
Right.
You know, most of the girls get a conviction for whatever their crime may be. Yeah, maybe, probably, most likely some kind of drug or drug-related crime. But at the same time, that doesn't mean they have to go to prison.
Right.
And what programs are out there for that alternative? And that's what's happening right now. And that's what's leading them away. Right. Yeah. So when you have a place like Oahu probably hasn't really given me a girl for a few years now, is because the resources are immense. But when we talk about the neighbor islands where the resources are not as much, how do we advocate to the legislature to say we need more funding into the neighbor islands so that we can have more progressive and more shelters for the girls?
Because we have a really good success story on Oahu, what can we do elsewhere?
Yes.
And everybody is different. Every island has a different vibe to it and all of that. We don't want to be telling others how to do things. But I mean, just to show as a la'ana, as an example, you know, I mean, what an awesome problem to have. Zero population.
Right.
Right.
I mean, a wahine, young wahine.
Right.
So you're doing something right, and I commend all of you.
I think it's important, if you understood, it's really the manner of how we treat our societal problems. Yeah. I've always said we've been successful at the women's facility, but we also know the social ills are still there that will cause women to come our way.
Right.
Yeah. So what we need to do is create that place of healing, because we know they're going to go back in maybe less than 3-5 years.
Right.
So public safety means more than just locking them up. It means preparing them and helping them in that transition back into the community. Would you say
that that's one of the key tenets of a rehabilitative versus a punitive model?
Yeah.
That what you just said, right, is making sure that we know they're going to go back out. They're going to go back out into the communities and back into the families, that we have to do something. It is our job, you know, before that, to make sure that they return as healthy as they can be, to be able to face the challenges that we know are still there. When
you look at rehabilitative, you're saying that something is wrong, and you have to go to these programs so that you can be right for what we figure out is wrong with you, and then go back into transition. The law that created the Hawaii Correctional Systems Oversight Commission specifically says therapeutic. Because therapeutic is a mindset. Yeah, because you can have these rehabilitation in a correctional setting and it doesn't work.
Right.
Because this is a correctional setting.
Right.
So we're trying to change the mindset so everybody's on the same page, that we're in a therapeutic mode. Yeah. Right. That we're here to help them.
That's so awesome.
Make
Thank
better
you for
choices.
That clarification, because I know even people like me or other people who are out there who want to help advocate, right? Who want to, whenever there's a time that we can also lend voice to support, right? We might be saying the wrong words, right? We might be using the wrong terminology.
Let me give you another.
Instead of rehabilitative, use therapeutic, right? And know that what that all means.
In a punitive model, because it's about vocabulary too.
Right.
In a punitive model, you're going to say inmate, right? In a rehabilitative model, you're going to say offender, right? In a therapeutic model, you're going to say justice involved individual, justice involved family. which is just saying that they're involved in the system.
Right.
But it's not a negative connotation.
Right.
We got to change our wording so that we have more positive outlooks.
Sometimes you can go back right to Olelo Hawaii again. And I'm thinking about, so the Rehabilitation Act, which was the forerunner of the name that was before the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act by Prince Kalaniʻa Ole. So Rehabilitation Act, that doesn't, maybe that vernacular doesn't really work well, even in our discussion with you, Kawika. But what is the Hawaiian term for that? It's ho'opulapula. That is where the mana is. Pulapula is a sprout, and ho'opulapula is to cause things to sprout. When you're planting plants and you hanai, you water them, and whether it's the lehua or the maile or the a'ali'i or koa or what have you, and you actually see that happen. I think the ʻāina ho'opulapula was intended from the no'ono'o Hawaii, from the Hawaiian thinking, to not be a rehabilitation program or a punitive program, but rather one to help people be able to grow and sprout.
Right. Yeah, things are so much more better in Olelo Hawaii.
I like that.
That's
one of the things I talk about a lot. It's about when we refer to healing, it's not just an individual thing, but it's a relational thing. More recently, I've been talking about when our ancestors came over on the canoes, they had to have the best ability to maintain their relationship of that 30 to 40 guys that was on that canoe for a while. And they had to,
if
they
you
had to
miss
work
the
together.
boat, you miss the boat. So don't oversleep. Get up and get on the boat.
Well, what I'm trying to say is that mentality went to the village.
Yes.
Right.
Because everybody had a purpose on the boat. And so everybody had a purpose in the village. So even when issues arose, that's where all our relationship processes began and were practiced. Ho'oponopono. It was to heal the relationship.
Because the va'a is an island. Hemoku, heva'a, hemoku. But and I think that it's good for all of our lahui Hawaii. Every single Hawaiian in the world today descends from one of those people who got on the boat. So we sometimes think of things like Hoku Le'a and Hikianalia, Nainoa Thompson as being really up there and far removed from our reality, but we can own that, and that's a great metaphor for getting along and ho'oponopono and having good leaders. But to be a good leader, you have to know how to follow as well.
Right. I'm going to give you a tough question. I think this is a tough question.
Go
so
do it.
As a member of the as a member of the Oversight Commission, right? As someone who's leading the Oversight Commission, how do we deal with overcrowding in our prisons?
My perspective has been that we have working models already being done in Hawaii. If you look at what happened in the juvenile system, the judiciary took the lead. It wasn't the Office of Youth Service or who had the correctional facility. It was the judiciary that made a decision that we're not going to do this. So when dealing with overcrowding, judiciary needs to step up. And because right now everybody can dump on public safety because it's they don't have the responsibility of running that. We can say, okay, you're guilty, boom, you go. We arrest you, you go. Mental health, we're not going to handle programs. If they get arrested, they can go over there. It's really leadership on the front end for one.
Right.
Two,
where they enter the system.
Where they enter the system. Do they really need to be in prison? Is there alternatives to the issues that we're facing? Two is really understanding then what comes. How do we program them? How do we create the journey that I spoke about? If they're doing 5 to 10 years and they're going to have greater time than the women, how do we create that journey of healing for them? And are there things in the policies that allow them to say, hey, if I do all of this, is there a way for me to shorten my time? And then three, and the most important thing is developing their ability to return to the community. Right. When an individual returned from the pu'uhonua back into the village, he became part of the village again. And his gift was, brought back. We don't do that anymore. They come out of the prison and they're still isolated from the community. Right? They're still shunned. How do we change that mentality?
Two other Hawaiian terms. I'm trying to think. Well, Hawaii is hilina'i, which is to trust. I think we have so many good reasons to not trust people around us, because we've been taken down the road, taking opihi picking at high tide for far too long. And the other is ho'ihi. How do you nurture respect for one another? And one thing that our kupuna taught us, and this is now we're getting into kind of more the spiritual, almost religious side. But if we can remember that we were taught, or by our kupuna, that everybody has a kua within them, and if we can learn to recognize that before you start getting physical and all of that, but trust and respect that's not easy. That's a tall order.
And that leads me to my next kind of tough question, right?
Oh, you get plenty of tough questions. He's coming to my side of the table now.
No.
Is how do we humanize now, right? Because you've illustrated, right, through practice and through policy, kind of like, okay, this is kind of the steps, right? We still have a community, communities out there who are, who put up the walls, right? Who their perspective is like healing, therapeutic. They're gonna come out what pu'uhonua, Now we're always gonna have naysayers, right? Always gonna have haters out there doing different things, and the work still continues. But on a more, just on a more general level, how do we humanize our pa'ahau? I like what you said already about just the change in terms, right? That progression of terminology away from punitive into therapeutic, and identifying who it is that we're dealing with. That was so helpful. But what are some other ways that we can help, with the perception of pa'ahau in our communities?
One of the, I'll give you an example. We used to bring the children a lot into the facility to be with their mothers and the caregivers. And we have activities with them that the faith-based organizations that we partner with would provide so that they can have a fun day, right?
Yeah.
And to maintain the bond. And the correctional officers would say to me, boss, what are we doing this for them for? They lost their rights. I said, no, they didn't. They didn't lose their rights to their kids. Nobody can take that. But you have to understand, these same kids are going to school with your kids. These individuals are coming out. They're going to live right next door to you. So they're coming back to your community. You have the means to help them be successful in that. And with that attitude, don't be surprised when they're stealing from your house.
Right.
Or things are happening because you weren't part of the solution. Yeah. So we really got to know and understand that these people are coming back into our communities. They're not like they're going to come out and they're going to California.
Right.
They're going to be a continuing part of our community.
Right.
Yeah. And how do we manage? I hate this. I'll say it. Because in the American methodologies and what we're taught is, you can make the money, you can take care of yourself, you don't need nobody else. Yeah. Because we don't have a need for anybody.
Right.
We have these thoughts.
Right.
That say, well, if they can't take care of themselves, get them out.
Right.
Right. And so that's a hard question to answer and say this is the right answer. It's just it's a process of understanding that things that happen around you is because you fail to realize that these people will be around you.
That is the best answer, because you connected back to what you said earlier and what Manu so brilliantly brought up as that connection. He wa'a, he moku, he moku, he wa'a. Pilina is one of the most important things that we live by in Hawaii. Right, our relationship to anything, to keakua, to each other, to the spaces around us, to our neighbors, right, to our friends, to our enemies, to whoever, right? But pilina is super important, right? So what you said, I think, is super helpful for people. If you don't see that this solution, right, that you guys have kind of got, because we know the punitive solution doesn't work. Right. It's been tried. It's failed. Generations of people here in Hawaii, right? People all over the world, right? It's failed, right? And what you guys have done and showed, the proof is in the pudding, right? Is that a therapeutic model of wellness and well-being is our best chance as communities to be able to survive and thrive together. Right, and I think that's kind of what you're getting at.
You know, one of the another term that comes to mind is kaumaha, and kaumaha is sadness. It's just this deep, heavy burden of sadness, like lu'ulu'u and kaumaha. And I think one way, maybe this is something that you can, and maybe you already have done this, but one way to get to ease up the kaumaha is good food. I mean, feed them well. I mean, good fish, good poi. And not like they're getting the scraps, you know, from whatever anybody else never liked. But we also, I want to step back as well. Again, a little bit more. Olelo Hawaii is the word pa'ahau. And what does that actually mean? And pa'a is to be held fast or to be stuck. And hau is a reference to iron, the iron bars of a prison. So pa'ahau, literally, in Hawaiian thinking, it already has kind of a negative connotation.
Okay, Manu, you need to come up with a new word for the justice.
I have people. I have poi. No, and that's
no, for real.
Not
real,
meant to make light of it, but I'm more into the whole pula pula and into those kinds of things. But I think food. Or when you say when the keiki can come with their makuahine is pa'ahau ia, you know, art project or singing or that kind of thing. You know, it lessens the kaumaha.
I was going to actually say that earlier when Kawika was listing off those types of trauma and what end up resulting in PTSD, you know, as verbal abuse, you know, physical abuse, sexual abuse, you know, and I was going to say nutrition. Right, nutrition, the lack of proper nutrition we've seen when we introduce Hawaii, right, in a robust. I mean, we know the evidence, right? We have a history full of wellness that came directly from our food, right? So thank you for bringing that up.
It reminds me of Auntie Claire, who used to write the column in the Oha newspaper, Kawailoa, Claire Hughes, but also Tammy and Danny Smith. And it's not all Hawaiian food all the time, but it's healthy food. And I tell you, I would feel a lot better if I was eating well, and not like a fancy, kind of a Sunday buffet. But I mean, honor the akua within everyone and feed that akua.
I think I'll step further because one of the programs that we have on the Kawailoa Youth and Family Wellness Center is managed by Partners in Development. Is Kupa'aina Farms.
Awesome.
And that doesn't surprise me at all.
The whole point is for the populations to work it and then take the food back to their organizations and feed themselves. Sustainability. So they understand that it's part of the teaching of what, you know, of how do you get out of the current situation you're in. Understand food.
This is where I think also, and I don't know very much about the subject, and that's why, you know, sometimes when I'm talking to Mehana about what we're going to be discussing for our lunchtime chat, is we learn so much. But I wonder if other similar programs away from Hawaii even can have these kinds of conversations. I kind of want to go back to what we talked about earlier, where Hawaii was sort of pigeonholed in to this Native American prison system or in the boarding school or that sort of thing. It really doesn't work here. And I don't think it did.
I think it definitely, you know, foreign models, and we can count everything outside of Hawaii as foreign.
Yes.
Whether it be native or non-native, but anything outside of Hawaii.
But let's figure it out here and then go share it with them over there.
Right. And so I think there's
everybody
a lot
eats well. Everybody feels honored and respected.
We were just talking about Kawika testifying in front of Congress, at a congressional, and he was alongside other Native Americans. But you know, so thank you so much for your presence there, because every time I see a Hawaii testifying in front of Congress about a plethora of subject areas, we always bring elements of healing. There's something about us that I think the world needs. I might be a little biased, some small kind biased, right? But
small kind.
You know, small kind. But I really do think, what you have and what you've done over the last, what did you say, 34 years of your career.
You must have started very, very
He started when he was 2. Yeah. You know, he only 36 right now. So he just started, you know, he started when he was really young.
And smaller.
And I don't care how old you were when you started, but I'm so honored and blessed that we are all blessed that you did start. and you have a way of thinking that you need to share with.
Let me share one thing real quick to just to give you a comparison. So in substance abuse, they'll do their treatment. Okay, and they want to talk to the women to come out and tell their stories, and they're in a classroom on chairs in a circle, and most times I went to them and I said, they didn't like school, they have all these issues, and that we still put them in the traditional model in a classroom, and I said, well, what are you thinking? I said, I want to put them in the lo'i, put them in the lo'i with your counselor. And then see what happens while they're pulling weeds. The sun is shining on them. They're listening to the birds and see what comes out.
Right.
And because I said, if you look at any indigenous culture, the women are always gathered, doing something with their hands, and then oral history is being said, teaching is being done. And so why don't we go back to that way of doing things?
And math and science also live there too. They live in the lo'i. They live in the ulana lauhala, weaving. It's all about numbers. It's about planning. It's about ho'omanawanui and all of that. That's amazing.
And so that when they did it was like, oh, well, you're right. They just open up. I said, yeah, because they're in their place where they're supposed to be. Your place is not their place.
Right.
We're people of the land.
Your place again has failed over and over and over again, yet we keep doing it, right? Yes. And that's to your point.
You look at the DOE, for instance, and the DOE is a huge responsibility to educate the population throughout Hawaii. But then you look at what has happened or spun off from that over the years. Charter schools and Kulakaya Puni Hawaii are really very different than the typical model. So maybe that can sort of shift over and apply to this situation as well, where you can't expect everyone to fit into this particular model of whether it's rehabilitation or what, but out in Aloi, where you can actually plant something and see it grow, and you have a feeling of accomplishment.
Right. We have about 30 seconds left in the show.
No. What is Hanaho already?
What do you need from the community? What do you need us to help you with? How can we help you?
I think if I say this one thing right now, it's not about helping me. It's just really understanding how do we bring what we just talked about back to the families. The strength of our people is our families. And some of us do well, but all of the issues that we have with the criminal justice system, with social welfare, with mental health, is because families are struggling. So how do we as a people, we can only depend on the state for so much, but how do we begin to help ourselves and our families who are struggling so that we can be our own, control our own destiny in terms of our existence in the state systems generation after generation. How do we strengthen family?
Mahalo for that, Kawoha. All of us out there can find ways, right? As individuals, as family, as communities, as the organizations that we belong to help affect what Kawika just talked about, right? How do we strengthen our families, right? Really put some thought into that. How are we able, if we have strong families, how do we help other families that are not faring so well, right? How is it that each of us can make an impact on that? And that will kokua, right, what Kawika them have to do, on the other side, on the other end. And so thank you again,
thank you for being here.
Kawika Patterson.
We're going to leave him with a song over here because it just makes me think about a dear friend of ours, Ile Aloha Beniamina. And she, along with her good friends on the island of Kauai, writes this song, and it talks about the beauty of the children who grow strong in the sun and the beautiful leaves that are filled with aloha. So, and we just leave you with that one. For all the keiki out there, all the kane, all the wahine, all the ohana, and alu mai. Let's work together.
Yes. Again, on behalf of the Council for Native Hawaiian Advancement and the Kaiser Permanente National Benefit Fund, myself, Manu, Kawika Patterson here. Aloha to all of you. We'll be back here next week again. Midday Manaʻo, same time, same place. Ahui ho kākou.
Mahalo.